Dragon Age the Veilguard has just launched to an overwhelming praise from nearly every gaming publication and gaming news outlet. Each one of them shouting atop mountains for this game like it's the second coming of Jesus. But I, as well as many other people, were pretty skeptical about this. Something didn't seem right. Something seemed a bit sus. So I went out of my way to purchase this game with my own hard-earned money in order to see if this game truly does live up to the praises that all the game journalists are giving it. Were the gaming journalists actually right? Is this game actually a 9 out of 10 like IGN claims it to be? Or were the chud gamers correct that this game is woke infested slop? Well, after beating the game and clocking in about 50 hours, I can finally form my own thoughts and come to my own conclusion about this game. And I think I can definitively say without a shadow of a doubt that Dragon Age the Veilguard is not a great game. However, it was a bit better than I had expected it to be, but unfortunately this title was so frustrating to me because it actually could have been a good game if it weren't for the laundry list of little issues that were riddled throughout it. And this is so perplexing to me because every review across the board is giving it a 9 or a 10. But after playing it myself, it's nowhere near that score because the flaws are so glaring and problematic. It still wouldn't be a very good game due to the fundamental core of it being heavily flawed. Now I'm here asking myself if I even played the same game because it is poorly written, extremely shallow, and the worst of all, painfully safe. Bioware had the opportunity of a lifetime to actually make something unique, to make something that would shake up the gaming industry. Something that would put them back on the map as a great gaming studio because Lord knows they need it after 10 years of producing flop after flop. Well, I think they're gonna need another 10 years because this was not the silver bullet that they needed. Dragon Age the Veilguard is a total regression on every core gaming design philosophy that made them so great over a decade ago. Memorable characters with complex stories to tell, gone. Mature and interesting writers that respects your intelligence as an adult, vanished. And impactful choices that you make which alter your entire playthrough, completely missing. Look, I didn't really expect much going into this game. After seeing all of the trailers and gameplay footage, my expectations went all the way to the ground because they just did a horrible job at marketing this game to its intended audience. I mean, who is this trailer even for? 14-year-old Zoomers or 35-year-old millennials? But that's neither here nor there. For this review, I'm going to focus more on criticizing the actual core game itself rather than rambling on about the obvious ham-fisted political messaging that does. So if you're looking for me to complain about woke equals bad, then you're not going to find much of it here. Although there will be a section about it later on in the video, but for the vast majority of this review, I'm just going to talk about the objective reality of this game and why Dragon Age the Veilguard is such a massive disappointment. First, let's talk about the character creator because I've heard a lot of positive remarks about it and how it's full of boatloads of options. IGN even had a whole section in the review about how great this character creator was and how this was the best hair that they've ever seen. And while I do agree that the hair textures are actually really impressive looking, it's nothing really to be soy-facing about because the character creator overall is actually quite underwhelming. While it is great that the character creator has a large variety of options and sliders, you can't really do much with them because the sliders don't really change your appearance all that much. Putting the sliders at either extreme ends of the spectrum barely changes anything to the point where it makes me wonder what is even the purpose of having them. I can't give my character big boobs or a big butt because your choices are either small or slightly less small. I mean, just look at what the bulge is like in the maximum setting. Why even have a slider if it's not going to change much? And obviously, since I'm Asian, I gave my rook the smallest one. But anyways, despite this fact, you can still make a decent looking character with all the options. I say decent because the art style does not lend itself to good looking characters. Look, I know art is subjective or whatever, and different people have different preferences, but I just heavily dislike this new visual style because everyone looks like a hobbit. Seriously, every person in this game looks like they could be a background character in a Shrek movie. And don't get me started on the Qunari. Like, what the actual hell did they do to them? They used to look fierce, strong, and imposing. Now they're wimpy, weak, and flaccid. They look like handsome Squidward if he had horns and a fupa. What happened to the grimdark, semi-realistic art style that they had in Dragon Age Origins? It was badass and awesome, and now we have this pseudo Pixar film Disneyland shit that just doesn't look appealing. And I know I'm probably not the target audience for this game, but then who is? Because Dragon Age built their fanbase off of mainly dudes who like dark and edgy stuff. So I can imagine that this game alienated a large majority of its fanbase, which is the opposite of what the games journalists are saying, how this is a quote-unquote return to form and all of that. And I'm sure many other people enjoy this art style change, but for me, I just didn't vibe with it. Now onto the meat of the game, the combat. I'm sorry, but the combat system in Dragon Age the Veilguard just isn't very good. It tries to blend both the real-time action and tactical turn-based moments, kinda like how Final Fantasy VII Remake does it. However, the execution of the system is very poorly done. It just fails at doing either of the turn-based or real-time aspects properly, and the result is an excruciatingly basic and boring combat system that lacks any meaningful depth. There are no complex combo strings or cool style tricks that you can do against the enemies. Your most complex combo is pressing light or heavy attack 4 times in a row and sometimes using ranged. Every combat encounter essentially boils down to just pressing the correct attack type for whatever color health bar the enemy has until they die. Heavy attacks for yellow, ranged attacks for blue, and light attacks for red. This game never expands on its basic mechanics, and you'll pretty much see all the combat has to offer after the first 5 hours of playing. Now imagine doing the same thing over and over again for the next 50 hours of content. Not to mention that every enemy is so tanky that it feels like it takes ages to just go through one combat encounter, so I had to turn down the enemy health, not because the game was hard, but because the combat was so boring that I just wanted to be over with so I could move on to the next cutscene. And not only is the action combat really shallow and stale, but it's also very clunky in general. It feels like you're controlling a slow-moving tank that takes 2 seconds to move after you've inputted a command, only for it not to do what you wanted it to do. There were many times in this game where I was fighting the controls more than I was fighting the enemy. For example, if you lock onto an enemy and they teleport behind you or you lose line of sight, your lock-on completely disappears, meaning that you have to swing your camera around behind you and click the lock-on button again, and then sprint towards the enemy only to get 1 or 2 hits in. Then they teleport behind you and you have to repeat the same process every single time. This was the most annoying oversight that this game had. It's like no one on the dev team tested this and said, hey, it's really annoying having to constantly keep pressing the lock-on button over and over again. And it would be one thing if the lock-on was janky, but it's also in combination with the fact that some enemies frequently teleport around the battlefield. So I pretty much just gave up trying to use the lock-on feature at all because it was just a massive pain in the ass, which I could have tolerated if the tactical portion of the combat was more fleshed out to make up for it, but unfortunately it's not. It's even more rudimentary than the action combat. Anytime during battle, you can pause to bring up all the skills of you and your party members, and you can issue commands from there. The problem is that all you can do is just tell them to use one skill, which then puts all of them on a cooldown. That's it. That's all you can do with your companions. You can't even switch between party members, you can't issue them any real commands other than using their skill or targeting an enemy, and they don't even have health bars, meaning that they can't ever die. So all your party members are essentially just another cooldown for you to use during combat. And to make it worse is that each character only really has 1 or 2 useful skills that you'll only ever use. And that's because of the primer and detonator system, which is absurdly overpowered and kind of makes all the other skills not worth taking in comparison. You see, Bioware tried to make it so that you would have some quote-unquote synergy with your companions. And the way they did it is that anytime during combat, if you combine 2 skills together on the same enemy, you'll trigger an explosion on them. The problem with this primer and detonator system is that it's so grossly overpowered that it makes taking non-synergy skills pointless, because not only does it do a ton of damage in a large area, but it also puts the enemy into stasis for 3 seconds, allowing you to wail on them the entire time they're frozen. And since your companions can only use 1 skill before being put on cooldown, making them be the primer or detonator is just a no-brainer. Why would I bother taking any other skill when I could just chain multiple detonations back to back and deal way more damage that way? I can see what Bioware was trying to do here with this mechanic, but the combat is just way too limited to allow for any other playstyle to be viable. which is really disappointing because it feels like your companions are essentially cosmetic additions to your character that sometimes give you some flavor text. And it would be fine if they lead more into the action like Final Fantasy XVI did, but instead Bioware tried to haphazardly combine both aspects of action and tactical, which just resulted in an extremely primitive combat system that failed to engage me even slightly. What's also a massive problem for Dragon Age the Veilguard is the huge lack of enemy variety. There are 4 factions of enemies in this game, and each of them have about 4 to 5 enemy types within them, which sounds like a lot on paper, but in reality, since you're only facing one faction at a time for the majority of the game, you'll only be seeing the same 4 enemies in every quest. And if that wasn't bad enough, most of the bosses in this game are copy and paste reused assets of regular enemy types, including the same attack patterns. Now, I can tolerate fighting recycled mobs for a while, however, where I draw the line is when even the final bosses for the companion storylines are all reskins of regular mobs. I'm not joking, the final bosses for each one of the companion storylines are literally the same models they use for normal enemies with a different skin. I understand reusing boss models for some random throwaway side quest, which is not ideal, but I can tolerate it. However, these aren't just some random throwaway side quests, these are the grand finales of character arcs that have been building up throughout the entire game, and Bioware couldn't even be bothered to make even one unique boss for them. This is a AAA game that has had hundreds of millions of dollars in funding and has been in development since 2015. This feels more like a budget indie title made by 3 dudes in their mother's garage. Where was all the money spent? Was it spent on developing the hair models? I mean, they're nice and all, but I'd rather have more enemy variety than having more hair options. I mean, for God's sake, they reused the exact same dragon fight like 7 different times throughout this game. This was easily one of the biggest issues with Dragon Age the Veilguard that ended up leaving me bored with the entire experience just a few hours into it. Now, one of the other things that I thought was pretty decent about Dragon Age the Veilguard was the itemization and skill trees. I'm not saying that they were insanely mind-blowing or anything, but they had a good amount of depth to them that allowed for people to create their own individual builds. I do like how instead of being just complete stat stakes, each piece of gear has unique modifiers that can help you make your own unique build. And it never felt like any piece of equipment you found was truly ever useless or obsolete because they can all be upgraded with you as you progress more throughout the game, and as you upgrade them, you unlock more effects for that item. The system is nothing crazy, but it did allow me to create my own bleed build that completely melted bosses. Speaking of builds, the RPG skill tree system was also pretty nice. There were a good amount of powerful nodes and skills on the tree that made taking them feel impactful to the overall gaming experience. Although the problem is that if they're not primers or detonators, then it feels like they're not really worth taking because it's such a huge damage loss. Now, one of the more enjoyable aspects of this game was the exploration. Surprisingly, I actually liked spending time exploring these maps. Although I wouldn't exactly say that this is an open world game, it's more of a small open area type of game, and there are a bunch of branching paths that lead to some nice loot and secret boss fights. I'm not gonna lie, the most fun I've had with this game was when I was just out and about exploring every nook and cranny of the map, solving puzzles and picking up every bit of loot that isn't bolted down to the ground. However, one of the problems with exploration is that the puzzles are so brain dead easy to solve. I don't know if Bioware thought their target audience were a bunch of literal children, or they actually believed that the average gamer was this stupid, but it felt like these puzzles were made for monkeys to solve for a lab experiment. Like, many of the puzzles will ask you to put the square block into the square hole, and the block will be literally 5 feet away from the hole, while there's a giant neon sign pointing at the solution. For example, this puzzle where the objective of it is to literally press the buttons with the matching symbols. That's it. That's all you have to do. And I get that the devs probably didn't want to make anything too difficult, but we're adults here, it's okay to make your audience think a little. It feels like these puzzles were made for that one game journalist that took like 20 minutes trying to figure out how to beat the tutorial section of Cuphead. They're pointless time wasters that don't provoke any critical thinking because most of them can be pretty much solved within 30 seconds. The devs really think that their audience is that dumb, and the perception permeates into the writing as well because they write as if their target audience were children. Which leads me to the biggest issue with this game by far, the story and the writing. If I had to describe the quality of the writing in Dragon Age the Veilguard, I would describe it as a bland, uninteresting piece of cardboard with huge chunks of dog poop smeared all over it. The writing ranges from safe, inoffensive, and boring slop to legitimately god-awful cringe that has no business being in any form of media ever. Like, it's such a gargantuan failure that this was what the culmination of 10 years of planning and storyboarding resulted in. I mean, where do I even begin explaining how bad this is? I guess the first thing would be that the dialogue itself is at best incredibly mediocre and at worst completely god-awful. I don't know who Bioware hired to write the dialogue for this game, but it's clear that they do not have the professional expertise to write a fantasy story geared towards grown adults with fully developed frontal lobes. A lot of the conversations in this game feel robotic because they don't really follow any sort of logical flow. I want to say it feels like ChatGPT wrote these conversations, but I'm pretty sure even ChatGPT knows how to write better flowing dialogue than what's given to us in this game. This is 100% without a doubt written by a human because only a human can write something this jarring and disconnected. Just take a look at how one of these cutscenes flows.
Taash, I have the clouds to watch and fish to eat.
More than just fish. Here you go. Shathan said to eat the fruit before it spoils.
I like the cookies better.
Everyone likes the cookies better.
I'll eat the fruit. Thank you, Taash.
Panahe done. I'll see you soon.
So, the dragon hunter has a softer side.
The Kyun says you take care of people.
So, you're a little Kunari, a little Ravani, and a little dragon?
Yeah?
Not always easy, is it?
Come on. I should tell my mother how Karash is doing.
You see how weird it sounds? It's so bad that it couldn't have been written by an AI. And this is the level of quality that Bioware has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on just for it to sound like a bad fanfiction from a 15-year-old who's never written in their lives. Either that or a 35-year-old who graduated with a degree in creative writing. Now, how about we take a listen to what actual good dialogue sounds like from The Witcher 3, a game made almost a decade ago.
Sit down. You beat them.
I never laid a finger on Tamara. Not once.
And on Anna.
That's another story. She always knew how to spark my ire.
Your wife. How'd she make you angry? Too much salt in the soup? Socks never darned?
20 years we've known each other. She's seen me drunk and sober. She was there to greet me when I returned the victor. She was there to patch me up in defeat. Like no other, she knew where to press, where to pinch, so it would hurt.
You beat her? For that? For criticizing you?
Oh, Witcher, you haven't a clue, have you? Well, perhaps I shall tell you about it one day. One day. But not today.
You knew they had run away from the start.
Yes, I knew.
Why didn't you tell me? Wasted my time.
Say I had. Say I'd said I had troubles. Couldn't control my wife, my daughter. What kind of flaccid prick would you take me for?
Gotta admit, I do think you're a prick. Not because you couldn't control them, but because you drove them away.
What?
Don't play the idiot. You gave them no choice.
Anna and I. It wasn't as it seemed. Seems.
All right, I'm all ears. Tell me what happened. The truth this time.
I'd been soaking myself 3 days straight. Anna came to me, said they were leaving. I begged them to stay. She refused to hear it. I tried to stop her. She wriggled like an eel. We struggled. She fell. Last blasted thing I remember. Woke up in the morn, breeches heavy with my own piss. A large bump on my head. Sadly, they were gone. Know what that's like, Witcher? No. How the fuck could you? I was left with nothing. Nothing! Only the bottle.
What happened next?
Next. It only got worse. I awoke at sunset, not knowing how many days had passed. Thought it was all a ploughing, drunken nightmare. And then I went to the bedchamber, and Anna was not there. Instead, there was blood everywhere. I knew she'd miscarried. My breath short, my throat locked. I neared the bed and saw it. It lay there, a tiny thing, defenseless, on bloodied sheets, dead. And it was my doing.
Maybe you're doing, maybe not. But that amulet she wore could be important. Or maybe the fact that she lost it. What did you do with the child?
What was I to do? Took it out and buried it.
Just like that?
Damn you! I gave no thought to a funeral. It was a horror. I wanted it to end. That child had been my dream. I told Anna, the little one, our little one, to make things right. Yet she died before she could be born. Understand, Witcher? My child was dead.
It's a stark contrast in quality that has pushed the boundaries of what kind of stories choice-based RPGs can tell. And in the year 2024, Veilguard's writing is sorely lacking now that there are way better alternatives out there on the market. And not only is the quality of writing just absolutely horrible, but for about 90% of the game, your choices don't really have a tangible impact on your gameplay because they don't actually ever change the outcome of the situation you're in. Most of the options that you're given are mainly for roleplay or flavor text purposes, which isn't a bad thing, but it speaks volumes about the major lack of player agency when many of your options are false choices. I think the first real choice you get in the game that actually impacted the direction of the story was about 10 hours into the game, when you have to choose which city to save from the dragon attacks. That's the first real choice you have to make. The next couple of impactful choices are made within the last 10% of the story after you've played about another 30 hours. And I'm not gonna lie, these were actually some consequential decisions you had to make that affected the characters around you. And it was actually pretty cool, but where were all of these decisions for the rest of the 90% of the game? Throughout my entire 50-hour playthrough, I think I've made about 5 or 6 choices that actually had any real consequences. That's not a lot for a game that prides itself on having choices that matter. And speaking of boring, the story and world building of Dragon Age the Veilguard has got to be some of the most uninteresting and forgettable video game worlds that I've ever experienced in my life. Everything in this game was so painfully safe and sanitized that it felt like I was playing a medieval fantasy version of a Marvel movie. You guys remember that one official pre-release trailer for Veilguard that's supposed to introduce the new cast of characters to the audience, and it did it in the most cringe, how do you do fellow kids way that it could? Well, that trailer was pretty damn accurate to what the vibe of the game was actually going to be like and how the cast was going to be portrayed. Like, the dialogue was just so juvenile and asinine that I was often left wondering if this game's target audience was truly intended for grown adults or grown children, because everyone in this world are apparently buddies with each other. And the only conflict that exists is when the big bad mustache twirling elven gods, who are clearly evil, try to destroy the world because they can. There's never any nuance or moral gray areas in this story. Everything is just black and white, good versus evil. There's never any internal conflict. No one hates each other or anything. Everyone just holds hands and sings Kumbaya. It's so painfully obvious that the writers didn't want to offend anybody when creating this world, so they just have everyone get along with one another, which makes for an incredibly boring storytelling because no one can ever have a real disagreement about things that matter. And when characters do have one, it's over the most stupid and childish shit, like calling someone a poo-poo head as if they were 5-year-olds at a daycare, and of course we have to step in and talk to them like we're the grade school teacher.
I can't believe you're asking for a favor as though nothing's happened.
What crapped in your bed?
Sorry, didn't know you two were in the
Rook,
middle of...
excellent. Come in. We could use a second sober voice.
I'm not drunk. You're drunk.
It's a figure of speech.
Taash?
I didn't do anything.
Oh, come now.
I need one of these little needle things to dig some crap out of my armor. Death Mage won't give me one.
First, a bone threader is an extremely delicate instrument. Second, it's Emmerich. Taash, my name is Emmerich, not Death Mage, not Corpse Guy, not... I won't repeat the rest.
What? You are a Death Mage.
Why are all my attempts to converse with you met with scorn? What have I done to you, Taash?
You talk about corpses too much.
It's a rich topic.
No, corpses are messed up. They used to have people in them. You make them move like they're alive, but they smell wrong and they move wrong, and none of it is okay.
Oh.
Especially the ones with skin still on them.
So what I'm hearing is... Taash isn't into terrifying dark magic,
It's not all terrifying.
and Emmerich would appreciate not being bullied and called names.
Fine.
I'd no idea necromancy upset you so deeply, Taash. Quite honestly, I didn't think you feared anything.
I don't. But I could have said it was bugging me. I didn't think you cared what I thought.
Of course I do. We're colleagues on this journey.
Okay. Sorry I called you a liker. Skull liker.
Maybe you two can find different things to talk about around each other.
I'll try not to press on the subject of necromancy when we travel together, Taash.
Okay. Thanks. It's fine if I ask about it first.
In that vein, could we avoid any dragon trivia?
What? Who doesn't like dragons?
There's lots of other stuff to talk about. Taash knows Ravane and the Cune. Emmerich knows Navara and plants.
Plants. Plants are okay.
I have always been curious about the Lords of Fortune.
See?
Like, who wrote this and thought, yes, our target audience of fully grown adults will love this? It's completely insulting to the audience's intelligence to write this childish drivel and expect people to be engaged with it. We are not toddlers anymore. We don't need to have this Disney Channel ass writing in order to tell the audience, remember kids, it's not okay to be a big meanie. And on the topic of being a big meanie, you can't be mean at all in this game. If you enjoyed doing a Dark Urge playthrough in Baldur's Gate 3 or did an evil playthrough in past Bioware games and you wanted to do something similar in Dragon Age Veilguard, then you'll be extremely disappointed because you can't do anything remotely close to that. You don't have a choice in what you want to roleplay as, only the illusion of a choice. Your options in pretty much 99% of conversations are yes, but nicely, yes, but sarcastically, or yes, but sternly. Every option in this game are only different versions of saying yes or being nice. You can't ever tell anyone no or tell them to piss off because apparently these devs feel like being a jerk is much worse than trying to literally destroy the world. Which also consequently makes it so that every one of your companions are also super uninteresting. I don't think I can name a single character in this game that I actually liked because all of them were so surface level and one-dimensional. It felt like these were just archetypes of character personalities that someone on the writing team saw on TV and tried to emulate very poorly. For example, Blara is the neurodivergent quirky one, Nev is supposed to be the independent girl boss, Lucanus is the cool nonchalant one, and Taash, oh my god, Taash is so bad that I'm gonna have a whole section of this video dedicated to just talking about how abysmal this character is. But for now, I want to talk about how dreadful the companion questlines are because they have you do the most mundane and boring shit pretty much the entire time. Like, for example, this quest where the main objective is to gather 3 rocks. Or this one where you have to literally pick flowers and light some candles. That's it. That's the entire quest line. I know that the real purpose of these quests are to have a conversation with your companions so they can reveal more about themselves and the lore around them, but recent games like Baldur's Gate 3 showed us that there are better and more interesting ways to integrate these into the gameplay without having to bore the player to death with meaningless drivel. Many of these missions feel like filler quests placed there so that the devs can pad out playtime. I would say that more than half of these companion quests could easily be removed from the game or merged into a few quests, and it would massively improve the overall gaming experience. Because not only are they boring to sit through, but the frequency that they're given to you is so overwhelming. The way that they're set up is like little optional side quests for you to pick up back at the main hub, and at first there weren't that many because it was at the beginning of the game when you didn't have that many companions yet. But as you progress throughout the game, the amount of side quests dumped on you increases exponentially to the point where you're spending way more time doing boring side quests rather than the main quest. And this seriously becomes an issue near the end of the game where your companions literally tell you that they can't kill the big bad guy because they want you to do their side quest. And so the game just dumps a metric ton of side quests in your head that completely kills the pacing of the story. It was so bad that I think in the final third act of the game, I spent like 6 hours doing all the side quests because they gave you like 20 of them after each main story mission. Not only that, but these side quests were so unbearably drawn out with so much useless dialogue that provides nothing of value to the player. It just felt like these were chores that the devs were giving to us because they just felt so forced. The most egregious example of this is this one quest where you have to find at least 6 wolf statues out in the open world in order to get the alternative good ending. And once you found at least 6 of them, you'll have to go back to the lighthouse and put them back on a pedestal, which then triggers a lore dump cutscene. And then afterwards, the whole crew convenes at the meeting room to literally explain what just happened in the cutscene, like you're in high school and the teacher is trying to have a group discussion on To Kill a Mockingbird. And that's not even the funniest part, because you have to do this 6 times in a row. No, I am not joking. You actually have to watch 6 cutscenes back to back to back with a discussion right after each one. This segment probably takes about 30 minutes alone to complete. The total disregard of the audience's intelligence is palpable here, and it's frankly insulting that they expect people to enthusiastically sit through all of this useless exposition. What they should have done is have these lore dump cutscenes play right after you find the statues so that they're spaced out more evenly and feel more natural. The fact that it's like this goes to show just how botched this game was from a development phase and how little they thought of the player experience. Speaking of player experience, I mentioned earlier that each of the companions were kinda mediocre overall because most of them were pretty safe and had boring personalities. Except for one of them, Taash. Taash was easily the worst companion out of all of them because they were the most obnoxious, unlikable, and cringe character in the game. Now, I don't care about what gender someone identifies as or what their pronouns are. If you want to identify as an Apache helicopter with Z0 pronouns, then go ahead. Despite me making fun of wokeness and DEI, I actually don't really care that much if a game is woke. The only thing that really matters to me is whether the game is good or not, and unfortunately, that's not the case here. Look, I understand that the writers wanted to create Taash to represent non-binary people and their struggles of coming out as one, but this is the worst portrayal of a non-binary person that I've ever seen in any form of media, period. And it's so bad that it not only makes the writers look incompetent, but it also makes proper trans representation in media so much harder because this game lacked the grace and elegance to tell this kind of story in a mature manner. Instead of making Taash act like a normal person, the writers thought it would be more relatable for them to act like an awkward, angsty teenager that's a complete prick to everyone around them. And obviously, they have to hate their mother because she just doesn't understand what being non-binary is. I mean, it's literally not a word in their fantasy language, but Taash still somehow knew what being non-binary was. This feels like one of the writers just inserted their own life story into this game as a way to relate to trans people, but the thing is, nobody likes an angsty teenager, especially one that's just a miasma of unhappiness like this one. Taash's entire questline is completely and utterly god-awful. From the writing, the characters, the interactions, it was all rancid. The writers made every conversation with Taash so awkward and disjointed because Taash can't hold a conversation or regulate their emotions to save their life. So that's why we get such cringe-worthy scenes like this.
Here's the ginger.
Thank you.
So, I'm non-binary.
What does that mean?
It means I don't feel like a man or a woman.
If you are neither a man nor a woman, then what are you?
Non-binary. I just said, and I'm going to use they instead of she from now on.
If this is because I have criticized your dress or your manners...
It isn't!
Under the Cune, the term for one whose gender does not match the one given to them at birth was a cuniflock. Perhaps you are like that.
Why do you have to keep picking at it? Why can't you just be happy for me?
Evatash, Chakra Toebra.
So I'm supposed to struggle with who I am? Even if I don't feel like I fit, even if I feel wrong?
No, you misunderstood.
Then say it better! Why am I never enough for you?
I will go.
This scene was so bad that I physically recoiled while watching it. No normal person speaks in this manner. This isn't how you have a thoughtful dialogue or a discussion. This is just the writer's personal fantasy of how they wanted to come out in their own life because they have some sort of deep-seated unresolved trauma with their own parents. Taash's story isn't a fictional tale, it was an autobiography because the writers wanted to insert themselves into this game so badly. Look, I'm not saying that you can't write a story about questioning your own gender identity. There have been games that have done it before in an infinitely more respectful tone, like in Persona 4 with Naoto. The problem with how it's portrayed here in Dragon Age the Veilguard is that the writers lack the emotional intelligence and professional writing competency to tell this kind of story without it being patronizing. That's evidenced here in this cutscene where Taash finally establishes their non-binary status, but one person accidentally misgenders them, and what happens is just cringe.
Taash pries the enormous ruby out of the statue's eye socket. Except then it wakes up, and now it's real pissed that it's missing an eye.
Oh, my.
What kind of statue was this?
Big snake.
Like, the size of a horse?
30 feet tall. Had the size of a wagon. How'd you get up there? They carved the scales. Made okay handholds.
And now we've got a giant, angry, one-eyed snake statue trying to swallow Taash whole.
Wait, how does that work? Where would they go? Did it have a stomach?
Wait for it.
Best part is, while Taash is pounding that snake's nose, she's still holding the ruby in her other hand. Maker's panties, I was so proud.
Oh,
Ah, shit. They're still holding it, sorry.
What are you doing?
Pulling a barb.
Oh. Okay.
a barv?
Tradition in the Lords of Fortune, from one of our old members, Barv. Good guy, but like most of us, his plans went sideways a lot. Bad blood among your crew's not good for morale, but there's not always time for big, drawn-out apologies. So, when one of us screws up and we know we've screwed up, we do a quick 10 to put it right. Pulling a Barv.
Like, what message are the developers trying to tell with this scene? They should self-flagellate whenever you misgender someone, even though it was an accident? This feels like the writers wanted to inject their own personal fantasy desires of what the real world should be like, instead of actually trying to tell a compelling story. That's why there's so much ham-fisted moral and political messaging in this game. That's why there's literally no conflict of beliefs between anyone in this world that's not cartoonishly evil. It's due to the writers having no idea how to create nuance because they have no perspective on differing opinions. They've surrounded themselves with only other individuals that share the same worldview as they do, which of course leads to a lack of diverse thoughts, or in other words, an echo chamber. And that is the biggest reason why Dragon Age the Veilguard's writing sucks so much. And it's a shame, really. This game could have actually been good despite the awful reception to it pre-launch. I knew that I should have been a bit skeptical of the reviews when almost all the major publication sites gave this title 9s and 10s across the board, but I still gave it a chance to truly see it with my own eyes. And after spending 50 hours of my life playing this game to full completion, I can confidently say that my hunch was right. This is not a very good game. Now don't get me wrong, it's not a terrible game either, it does have some good parts to it, but overall the whole package at its core is just fundamentally flawed, and it's nowhere near the 9 or 10 scores that the game reviewers have been giving it. At best, this is an above average simple RPG with decent set pieces and art. At worst, it's a vapid, generic game that was obviously rushed during production with some of the worst writing I've ever seen in any RPG. And the beloved Bioware that we all once cherished is long gone, replaced by a puppeteer parading its corpse.